It was a bright, warm morning, the kind of day that makes you want to go out and do something new. The streets were bustling, people were on the move, and the sun reflected off shiny car windows and store glass. Among the crowd walked a woman named Sarah. She wasn't dressed fancy. She wore a simple blue blouse, comfortable jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face held a calm but determined expression. Sarah had one mission that day: she wanted to buy a car. It wasn't just any car. She had spent weeks browsing online, reading reviews, and comparing features. She knew what she wanted, and she knew exactly where to go. The dealership she had chosen was one of the most high-end ones in the city, known for its luxury vehicles, sleek sports cars, shiny sedans, and the newest electric models that turned heads everywhere. But Sarah wasn't after flash. She was looking for comfort, safety, and quality. She stepped into the dealership quietly. The large glass doors opened automatically, and cool air wrapped around her as she entered. Everything inside screamed wealth: polished marble floors, sparkling lights above, and smooth jazz playing softly in the background. Several cars were displayed on the floor like artwork, each one gleaming under spotlights. Sarah stood there for a moment, taking it all in. She walked slowly, looking at the cars, admiring their clean lines and powerful builds. Her eyes lit up when she found the exact model she had researched the night before. A smooth silver SUV with top safety ratings and the kind of space she needed for road trips with her family. She reached out, touched the handle, and gently opened the door to peek inside. That's when it happened. A voice from behind interrupted her quiet moment. "Ma'am, please don't touch the vehicles unless you're serious about buying." She turned around. A man in a tailored suit was standing there, arms crossed, an artificial smile on his face. His name tag said Brad. Sarah gave him a polite smile and said, "Oh, I am serious. I've done a lot of research on this model. I think this might be the one." Brad looked her up and down. His smile faded just a little. "Aha," he said slowly, dragging the sound like he didn't believe her. "Well, these vehicles start at $85,000. Just so you know." "I'm aware," Sarah replied, still calm. "I've looked at all the specs online. I'd like to take a test drive." Brad didn't move. He looked around as if hoping someone else would come deal with her. Then, with a sigh, he said, "We typically need to check credit information before offering test drives on this level of car. It's dealership policy." Sarah was confused. "I didn't see that mentioned anywhere." "It's standard," he said, brushing off her concern. "Besides, we're a little busy right now." The place wasn't busy. There were 3 salespeople standing near the coffee machine, chatting and laughing. Another one was scrolling through his phone behind the reception desk. Sarah's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment but with frustration. She stood a little taller and said, "I came here prepared to buy. If you won't help me, is there someone else who can?" Brad smirked. "Look, it's not personal. We just like to be careful with our inventory. These vehicles are expensive." Sarah stared at him. He didn't flinch. She took a deep breath and walked over to the reception desk. "Hi," she said to the young woman seated there. "Is there a manager available?" The receptionist blinked at her, then glanced toward Brad, who was now shaking his head slightly, like he was warning her off. The receptionist hesitated. "Sorry, ma'am," she said quickly. "The manager's in a meeting." Sarah nodded slowly, her heart sinking. She turned back one more time, gave the car she loved a final look, and then walked out. The moment the doors closed behind her, she felt a wave of emotions: anger, disappointment, disbelief. It wasn't the first time she had been judged based on how she looked, but it still stung. She had come in with hope, with excitement. She had come ready to make a big purchase. And yet, all it took was a glance at her clothes, her shoes, and they decided she wasn't worth their time. She sat down on a nearby bench and pulled out her phone. She hesitated for a second, then tapped on her husband's number. He answered immediately. "Hey, love." His voice came through warm and cheerful. "Did you find the car?" Sarah paused. Her throat felt tight. "Not really," she said, forcing a small smile he couldn't see. "I did find it, but they didn't take me seriously. They wouldn't even let me test drive it." There was silence on the other end. "What happened?" he asked, voice lowering. Sarah told him everything: how the salesman spoke to her, how the receptionist looked at her, how they treated her like she didn't belong. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said just one thing: "Wait for me." Sarah didn't ask what he meant. She knew her husband. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but he had built an empire quietly over the last decade. Tech, real estate, finance, he had a hand in all of it. He preferred to keep things simple, live modestly. But when it came to protecting the people he loved, he didn't stay quiet. She sat there, hands in her lap, heart still beating fast. And 20 minutes later, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled up in front of her. The engine purred like a big cat, and the driver's door opened. Out stepped her husband. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, dark trousers, and sunglasses that looked like they cost more than most people's rent. But it wasn't the clothes that made heads turn. It was the way he moved, calm, confident, and focused. He walked over, kissed her on the cheek and said, "Let's go get your car." Together they walked back into the dealership. This time the glass doors opened for both of them. The music was still playing, the lights still shining, but the atmosphere shifted the moment they stepped inside. Heads turned. Brad, still leaning near the car Sarah had admired, straightened up. The receptionist froze mid-sip of her coffee. Sarah didn't say a word. She just stood beside her husband as he walked toward Brad. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly. "My wife was here earlier. She wanted to buy a car." Brad blinked, clearly recognizing him now. He stuttered a little. "Yes, I believe we spoke. But, we didn't know." "She didn't need to be known," he said, his voice still calm. "She knew what she wanted. She had done her research. She was prepared to pay in full." Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sarah's husband glanced around the dealership floor, then looked back at Brad. "Is this how you treat all your customers? Or just the ones who don't wear designer shoes?" Brad swallowed hard. I'm sorry. There must have been a misunderstanding." Sarah stood silently, watching him squirm. A part of her wanted to walk out again, but another part, the one that had been humiliated, stood firm. The rest of the staff were quiet now, eyes wide, lips tight. The receptionist lowered her head. Even the background music seemed to fade. Sarah's husband turned to her. "Do you still want the car?" She looked at it again, the SUV she had been so excited about. It was still beautiful. Still perfect for her. But now it felt different. Not because of the car itself, but because of how she had been treated. She nodded, but slowly. Her husband smiled gently. "All right then," he said. "We'll take this one. And maybe 2 more for the team." Then he turned back to Brad. "Find someone else to process it. Someone who understands what respect means." Brad stood frozen. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His face, once full of smug confidence, was now pale and unsure. He glanced over his shoulder, hoping maybe the receptionist or one of the other salespeople would step in, but no one moved. They were all watching, some out of shock, others out of fear that they might be next. Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words. The same woman who had been ignored and insulted only yesterday was now standing beside a man whose presence made the entire room hold its breath. One of the younger salesmen, a guy named Kevin, barely in his mid-20s, hurried over, clearly sensing an opportunity to clean up someone else's mess. "Good afternoon, sir, ma'am," Kevin said politely, a nervous smile on his face. "I'd be happy to assist you today." Sarah's husband looked at him for a moment and gave a small nod. "Thank you. We're ready to purchase this SUV," he said, gesturing toward the car Sarah had liked. "And while we're at it, I'd like to see your latest electric models too." Kevin's eyes widened just a little, but he stayed professional. "Of course. Right this way." As Kevin led them deeper into the dealership, Brad slowly backed away. He stood near the window now, trying to look busy, but his body language told the real story. He was rattled, shaken, and deeply embarrassed. Kevin, meanwhile, was the exact opposite of Brad. He was respectful, kind, and attentive. He answered every question, explained every feature, and even offered Sarah the keys for a test drive without hesitation. "I trust you'll enjoy it," he said with a genuine smile. "This model handles beautifully and it's one of our top sellers." Sarah smiled back for the first time that day. She got into the driver's seat while her husband climbed into the passenger side. The engine purred to life, and as she pulled out of the dealership parking lot, she felt something shift inside her. Not just excitement over the car, but a sense of being seen. A sense of being heard. The test drive was smooth. Quiet streets, clean turns, and a few minutes of peace after the storm. Her husband reached over and held her hand for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I am now." When they returned, Kevin was waiting outside with a clipboard and a big smile. "So, what do you think?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "We'll take it." Kevin beamed. "Perfect. I'll prepare the paperwork. Would you like to look at the electric cars now?" Her husband nodded. "Show me your best." As they walked back into the showroom, whispers started floating through the dealership. A couple of employees were trying not to look too obvious, but everyone was talking. Who was this man? How much was he really worth? What would happen to Brad? No one had answers. But everyone had the same thought: they'd made a big mistake. Kevin introduced them to two high-end electric vehicles. Sleek, cutting-edge, loaded with tech. Sarah's husband inspected both with a careful eye, nodding now and then, asking questions, noting features. Finally he turned to Kevin. "We'll take both. One for my assistant. One for our company fleet." Kevin blinked. "Both?" "Yes. And I want to pay in full. Today." Kevin nodded quickly, trying not to look too surprised. "Absolutely, sir. I'll just need your ID and some basic paperwork." As they stepped into the office, Brad slowly made his way to the manager's door. He knocked once, then slipped inside, clearly looking for a way to explain or maybe defend himself. But the damage had already been done. Back in the office, Kevin was professional, calm, and efficient. He handed over the documents, and Sarah's husband didn't even flinch at the numbers. The total came to nearly $400,000. He signed without blinking. As Kevin processed everything, Sarah leaned back in her chair and looked out the glass wall of the office. She could see Brad standing with the manager, both of them speaking in low tones. The manager looked furious. A small part of her wanted to gloat, to feel victorious. But that wasn't really her. What she wanted, more than anything, was for people like her to be treated with dignity, no matter how they dressed or what they looked like. Kevin returned with the final keys, a wide smile on his face. "Congratulations," he said, handing them over. "It's been a pleasure working with you both." Sarah smiled. "Thank you, Kevin. You've been wonderful." Her husband stood, reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "If you ever decide to leave this place," he said to Kevin, handing him the card, "give us a call. We're always looking for people who know how to treat others with respect." Kevin looked down at the card, clearly surprised. His eyes scanned the company logo and the contact number. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." They walked out together. As they passed the reception desk, the girl who had ignored Sarah the day before tried to smile, but her eyes dropped quickly. She didn't say anything. Sarah didn't either. But just as they reached the door, the manager came rushing over. He was red in the face, sweating a little, clearly out of breath. "Excuse me, sir," he said, nodding toward Sarah's husband. "I just want to apologize for what happened yesterday. That's not how we run things here. I've already spoken to the staff involved." Sarah's husband didn't respond right away. He looked at the manager, then glanced at Brad, who was watching from a distance, his face blank. "Thank you," he said finally, polite but firm. "But the apology isn't for me. It's for my wife." The manager turned to Sarah, his voice softer now. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry. Truly. We handled things poorly and we take full responsibility." Sarah looked him in the eye. "Thank you. I hope next time, the next woman who walks in here, dressed like me, gets the same respect as anyone else." The manager nodded quickly. "Absolutely." They left the dealership with keys in hand, a brand new SUV parked outside, and 2 electric cars scheduled for delivery later that week. As the doors closed behind them, Sarah took a deep breath. The sun was still shining. The street was still busy. But everything felt different now. Not because of the cars or the money or even the awkward apology. But because she had walked through the fire, stayed true to herself, and come out stronger on the other side. And somewhere deep inside that dealership, behind the polished floors and shiny cars, there were people who would never forget her face, not because of who her husband was, but because of who she was. The sun was starting to lower in the sky when Sarah and her husband drove away from the dealership. The brand new SUV glided smoothly over the road, its engine humming softly. Sarah's hands rested on the wheel, but she wasn't just driving, she was thinking. Her eyes stayed forward, but her thoughts wandered through every moment of the past 2 days. She had walked into that dealership with hope in her heart and been treated like she didn't belong. Now, less than 24 hours later, she had not only bought the car of her dreams, but reminded a room full of people that respect should never be based on appearances. And yet, the sting of that first encounter still lingered. Her husband sat quietly beside her. He wasn't one to talk too much when things were still fresh. He knew sometimes silence could say more than 1,000 words. But every so often, he glanced at her with quiet pride in his eyes, not just because of what she had done, but because she had held her head high even when people tried to tear her down. They pulled into the driveway of their home, a beautiful house tucked away in a private part of the city. Not flashy, not loud, just quiet elegance. Like them. Their housekeeper waved from the porch as they stepped out, her smile warm and welcoming. "Is that the new car?" she asked, her eyes wide. Sarah nodded. It is. Want to take a look? The woman rushed over, genuinely excited. She opened the doors, peeked inside, and gasped at the leather seats and high-tech dashboard. It's beautiful, she said, and Sarah smiled. I think so too. Later that evening, after dinner and a long hot shower, Sarah sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. The sky had turned deep blue, stars just beginning to appear. Her husband joined her with his laptop in hand, scrolling through messages. You know, he said without looking up, I've had 2 emails today from people who work at that dealership. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Oh. He nodded. One of them apologized again. Said he wasn't part of the situation, but felt ashamed to work in a place where something like that could happen. The other one asked if there were any openings at our company. Sarah took a slow sip of tea. Guess word spreading fast. Her husband looked at her, his expression thoughtful. It's not just about you or me. It's about how easily people make judgments. How quick they are to assume someone's worth based on their clothes or car or bank account. Sarah nodded. I've been on both sides of that. I used to clean houses before I met you, remember? People wouldn't even look me in the eye. Like I didn't exist. He reached over, gently touching her hand. That's why they'll never break you. They sat in silence for a while longer, the air filled with the soft sounds of the night. But even as the stars shimmered above, Sarah couldn't shake one thought. How many others were being judged every day the same way she had been? How many women like her were walking into places, full of hope, only to be turned away without a second glance? The next morning, Sarah got up early. Her husband was still asleep and the house was quiet. She walked into her small home office, sat at her desk and opened her laptop. For the next hour she typed. It wasn't a letter of complaint. It wasn't a social media rant. It was something more personal. A story. She wrote everything, how she walked into that dealership full of excitement, how she was treated, and how things had unfolded after that. She didn't name the business. She didn't name the salesman. But she described the feeling, the weight of being judged, the pain of being dismissed, and the strength it took to stand tall anyway. By the time her husband woke up, the post was already live on her blog. A few hundred people read it that morning. Then a few thousand. By the end of the day, it had been shared over 50,000 times. People flooded the comments section. Some shared their own stories. Some expressed outrage. Others simply said thank you, for speaking up, for standing up, for being a voice they could relate to. And while the attention wasn't something Sarah had planned for, she realized it was something that needed to happen. One message in particular stood out. It was from a young girl, maybe 19 or 20. I work part-time and go to school, the message said. I walked into a designer store last week to buy a purse for my mom's birthday. I had saved for months. But the lady at the counter told me, without even asking, that everything in here is out of your budget, dear. I felt so small. I walked out crying. Your story made me feel like I wasn't alone. Thank you. Sarah read that message twice. Then she closed her laptop and stared out the window. She didn't need fame. She didn't want revenge. What she wanted, more than anything, was for people to remember what that girl said. I felt so small. No one should feel that way. Ever. Later that week, her husband had a meeting downtown. On the way back, he made a quick stop. Not for himself, but for Sarah. He walked into a florist shop, chose a bouquet of soft pink roses, and asked the lady behind the counter to write a note with it. When he returned home, he placed the flowers on her desk and left the note leaning against her laptop. It read, "To the strongest woman I know. You didn't just buy a car. You changed something bigger. Keep writing. Keep shining. Always me." Sarah found the note later that evening. Her fingers brushed over the words slowly, and for the first time since that strange, awful day at the dealership, she let herself cry. Not out of sadness, but from release. From the deep, quiet joy of knowing she'd taken something painful and turned it into something meaningful. She kept writing. The blog grew. More and more people began following her, reading her words, sharing their own stories. And somewhere, in a city filled with people and noise and movement, a certain car dealership was starting to feel the effects. Sales dropped. Reviews poured in. Not just because of Sarah's blog, but because people had started talking. Asking questions. Demanding better. Inside the dealership, Brad no longer stood with confidence. He moved differently now, quieter, smaller. His manager was watching him more closely. And the company itself had been forced to start a new round of training, one that focused not on selling but on listening. Respect. Empathy. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start. And Sarah? She kept living her life, simply, honestly, boldly. Not as a woman looking for attention. Not as a wife of a billionaire. But as someone who knew her worth long before anyone else did. She didn't need luxury to feel rich. She didn't need applause to feel strong. She had something most people never found, a quiet kind of power. The kind that can't be bought. Only earned. A few weeks passed, but the story never really died down. Even after the initial wave of blog shares slowed, the emails kept coming. Some were short, a sentence or two from strangers saying they were proud of her. Others were pages long, written in the middle of the night, by people who had held in their pain for far too long. Sarah read every one. She didn't reply to them all, but she carried their words with her, in her heart, in her thoughts, and sometimes scribbled in the small notebook she kept by her bedside. It had become a quiet ritual. Each night before bed, she wrote one sentence from someone's message. Just one. And somehow, it always stayed with her the next day. Meanwhile, the dealership's troubles were becoming more visible. The company's head office had stepped in. Anonymous employee reviews had surfaced online, sharing not just what happened to Sarah but other stories too, about customers being profiled, staff being rewarded for pushing expensive sales to the right kind of people, and a culture that prioritized profit over people. Brad's name came up more than once. And though he still showed up to work every day, his swagger was gone. There were rumors that he was on final warning. That corporate was reviewing the footage from that day. That someone had even submitted Sarah's blog post with a formal complaint. But Sarah wasn't thinking about him anymore. Not really. Her focus had shifted. She had been invited to speak at a local community event, a small gathering meant to support women entrepreneurs and first-time business owners. The organizers had read her story and wanted her to come share it, not just the part about the dealership but everything before that. She hesitated at first. She wasn't a speaker. She didn't like stages. But then she remembered the young girl who had messaged her after that blog post, the one who walked out of the designer store in tears. She said yes. The event was held in a modest hall just outside the city. No red carpets. No fancy lighting. Just folding chairs, kind faces, and a table of homemade snacks at the back. The crowd was small, maybe 40 or 50 women. Some young, some older, a few with children on their laps. Sarah stood at the front, holding a mic with slightly shaking hands. She looked at them, really looked, and then began. She told them about her childhood. About growing up without much. About her first job cleaning offices at night while going to school during the day. She talked about the fear she used to feel every time someone looked down on her, or laughed, or assumed she wasn't capable. And then she told them about the day she walked into that dealership. She didn't use big words. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just told the truth. And when she was done, there wasn't a single dry eye in the room. A young mother stood up and said, "I was told last week I couldn't afford a home loan. They didn't even check my documents." An elderly woman shared how a bank officer had talked down to her, even though she'd run a successful business for 20 years. One by one, the women began opening up, telling their stories. Some for the first time. It didn't change the world in one night. But it changed that room. And Sarah walked away from it feeling something she hadn't felt in years, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that evening, back at home, she found a letter on her desk. Not an email. Not a text. A real, handwritten letter, in a crisp white envelope with no return address. She opened it slowly, and as her eyes moved across the page, her breath caught in her throat. It was from Brad. His handwriting was tight and slightly messy, like he was rushing or maybe nervous. He didn't apologize in the way she expected. But he did say this. "You don't have to forgive me. I wouldn't. But I want you to know that what happened that day woke me up. Not right away but slowly. I started seeing things. Seeing people. I talked to the receptionist. I talked to Kevin. I realized I've been part of a culture that treats kindness like weakness. That sees wealth and assumes worth. I'm not proud of who I was. I don't expect a second chance. But I'm trying to change." Sarah read it twice. Then she folded the letter neatly and placed it in her notebook, the same one with all those sentences from strangers. It wasn't validation. It wasn't redemption. But it was honest, and sometimes that's enough. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's blog grew into something bigger. She renamed it Quiet Power, and started accepting guest writers. She didn't want it to just be her voice anymore. She wanted it to be everyone's. Women, men, young people, seniors. Anyone who had been underestimated, overlooked, or mistreated for being too plain, too quiet, too different. The blog began attracting attention, not from tabloids or gossip sites, but from universities, small business groups, and local news stations that wanted to highlight the movement she'd sparked. Her husband, ever supportive, helped build her a home studio, not for flashy videos but for recording podcasts. Short, raw, simple stories. Faceless, just her voice. The way it had all started. And each episode began the same way. My name is Sarah. And this is for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Somewhere out there, in small towns and big cities, people were listening. On buses. In bedrooms. On late-night walks. And more than once, a stranger would stop her in a cafe or on the street and say, "I heard your voice. I didn't know what you looked like. But I knew what you felt like. Thank you." She never got used to that. But she always said thank you back. Meanwhile, Kevin, the young salesman from the dealership, had taken up her husband's offer. He left the dealership and joined their company not in sales but in outreach. His job was to train new employees on customer respect, emotional intelligence and unconscious bias. He thrived. He later confessed that seeing Sarah walk into the dealership that day, seeing how she was treated, had changed his whole perspective. "People think courage is loud," he said once in a company meeting. "But sometimes, it looks like a woman standing quietly, refusing to be broken." Sarah happened to be in that meeting. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes told the story. And somewhere in her notebook that night, she wrote a new sentence. "Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can be, is underestimated."